Hey man, do you think Taylor Swift will ever make another country album? I don't know, but I've been waiting on Tyler the Creator to drop his jazz album for the last 2 years. Hey, this is the wrong turn. We're gonna need to turn back. And just like that, the beginning of one of the world's bloodiest wars had begun. A war fought across 3 continents and involved around 30 nations. A war that lasted for 4 years and took the life of around 16 million soldiers and around another 6 to 7 million civilians who had been killed, either by war itself, famine, or genocide, and left an unfathomable amount of people permanently wounded, as well as leaving irreversible damage to the lands the war was fought on. A globalized war that saw man's worst atrocities and saw man's technological innovation to kill one another. A war that still has left marks in society today and practically started World War II and could easily be tied into the possibility of a Third World War, all over the assassination of one man and the radical beliefs of another. But how did we get here? And what was the build-up to the spark that blew up the powder keg that was Europe? As you guys can tell, this is my first video and I'm working on some things like comfortable commentary and some editing. The text wall and screen are videos for the future. If you are interested in future videos or like what you see, feel free to leave a like on the video and subscribe if you haven't already. Now back to the video. Before we start on what events lead up to the war that ended all wars, we need to understand a key aspect of World War I. We have to look at an idealism that heavily influenced European societies in the late 19th and early 20th century. This idealism is nationalism, which is the idea that people who share the same common language, religious background, and same cultural identity, that they should share a common nation state and govern themselves rather than be governed by a foreign power, uniting under a common cultural identity rather than being governed by a foreign entity. They believe that they should have the right to govern themselves and have their own nation state that represents their cultural ideals. Rather than dying for a foreign king's wars, they would rather die for their people, their political system, and their neighbor as well as their brothers and sisters. So slow unification into nation states began across Europe, either somewhat peacefully or in violent revolutions. Another ism that we need to know about is militarism, which had created an arms race within Europe that saw the development of mass amounts of stockpiles of weapons. That, throughout the next 50 years, would see the continuous mass production of war equipment like munitions, artillery, small arms weapons, and a naval race between Germany and Great Britain, all due to the production of industrialization. Now we will look into the nations that were involved in World War I and the buildup of hatred and alliances built over the last 50 years of European history leading up to the Great War. Austria Hungary has been through it as of late and has become little more than a paper tiger on the European map. They also find themselves in control of many different ethnic groups and are attempting to hold their ethnic empire together. And they are really an empire built off of old ideals that no longer fit in the current world of the early 20th century. The nation was led by Austrian Germans and ethnic Hungarians. This will come very important in later videos, but both parties in government almost have the same autonomy and representation in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The empire has lost back-to-back wars in the Second Italian War of Independence in 1859, where the Kingdom of Sardinia, backed by France, declared war on Austria-Hungary, and unified into a single nation state of Italy in 1961. Then, in the Austro-Prussian War of 1866, which decided who would be the German state to unify all of Germany under a single nation state, along with the 7 Years' War about 100 years prior, which also backed up that Prussia would lead the ethnic Germans. Italy would also join this war in 1866 on the side of the Prussians. In the peace treaty, the Germans would kick Austrian influence out of northern Germany, and Italy would gain more ethnic Italians within its borders. It is important to note that the Chancellor Otto von Bismarck had convinced King Wilhelm to have a lenient peace deal with the Austrians to keep them strong and turn them into an ally in the years to come. Germany, after beating Austria in the Austrian-Prussian War, created the North German Confederation, unifying almost all ethnic Germans into a single nation state, except for South Germans and Austria itself. But with the Franco-Prussian War in 1870, Otto von Bismarck who was the Chancellor of Germany at the time. Get used to his name because it will come up a lot. Bismarck was able to lay bait for the French to look like the aggressors in the war, who attacked Germany rather than Germany attacking France, which would keep out other nations in Europe away from the war. Otto von Bismarck believed that he could use German nationalism to rally all German states to join the war, and keep other Europeans from getting involved. The war ended in total defeat for the French, with the city of Paris surrounded and the French people starving. The Treaty of Frankfurt was signed on the 10th of May 1871. Germany would make France pay war reparations, and Germany would gain Alsace-Lorraine, which held many ethnic Germans, as well as humiliate the French, marking a change of military power in Europe. After the war, Germany unified and became the German Empire in 1871, creating a single nation state for the German people outside of Austria. The Ottoman Empire is another empire of many different ethnic groups, of which tensions were high and war was on the horizon. In 1876, the April Uprising began. It was a Bulgarian rebellion towards the overlords, the Ottomans, who brutally suppressed the Bulgarians and other rebelling nationalists across the Balkans, which saw a brutal Ottoman response, who committed many war crimes that turned Western Europe away from the Ottomans. The Russians wanting to support their southern Slavs with the idealism of Pan-Slavism and seeing that no one would back the Ottomans. They smelled blood in the water and invaded the Ottomans, sparking the Russian-Turkish War of 1877, which ended with the Treaty of San Stefano in 1878, where Romania, Bulgaria, Serbia, Montenegro all gained their independence with the backing of the Russian Empire, who also annexed regions of Bessarabia. However, the Germans in Western Europe did not like the treaty and revised it without the Russians, and redrew the borders to their liking. Romania, Serbia, Montenegro are still given their independence, but Bulgaria, however, is given their independence, but much of their territory is taken away from them and given back to the Ottomans, as well as Austria-Hungary would gain control over Bosnia. Russia feels betrayed by the Germans in Western Europe, and a deep grudge begins to form. Russia does get to keep the annexed territory in Bessarabia as well. This would mark the beginning of the end for the Ottoman Empire. However, Russia had been betrayed by Western Europe, and Otto von Bismarck allowed Germany to have decent relations with the failing and ever-sickening Ottoman Empire. However, Otto's original intentions were to have favor with both the Austrians and the Russians in this peace deal, who both believe that the Balkans are their backyard. The Berlin Conference in 1885, led by Otto von Bismarck, started the true beginning of the scramble of Africa. Bismarck invited 13 European nations and the United States to Berlin to figure out how the unclaimed areas in Africa would be divided. However, no African nation was invited, and ones that attempted to come were humiliated and ridiculed by the European nations like the Sultanate of Zanzibar. However, not all nations invited to the Berlin Conference got land, but the conference legitimized the ability to take from Africa and feed the industrial states of the West. The only African nations not conquered by 1913 were Ethiopia and Liberia. Past these states, Europe would own nearly 90% of Africa. The conference leaves marks in Africa that can still be seen today in its current borders. The borders were not drawn to include same religion, peoples, or languages like in Europe, but were drawn by rivers and material on or under the land. Austria-Hungary, Germany, Italy all joined in an alliance after France annexed Tunisia, forming the Triple Powers in 1882. But it was more of a defensive alliance. The idea was that if someone declared war on any of the three of them, they would all join in a defensive coalition against this one nation. This is very important in later videos. Russia has the largest population in Europe with about 162 million people within her borders at the start of World War I. However, its population is very multicultural, and many of these cultures and peoples were not accepted within its borders, along with the suppression of its own people under serfdom, which is basically slavery with extra steps. This will become important in later videos. Its industry had just really started to build up at a large scale, and its army is the largest in the world. However, before World War I, Russia's navy was dealt a devastating blow in the Russo-Japanese War of 1904. which saw Russia lose most of its Baltic fleet, which it had sent around the world, to just get blown apart by the far superior Japanese navy. The Russians also got humiliated on the land in eastern China and Siberia. This war started the belief that European powers were not invincible, and it humiliated the Russians. At the end of the war, Russia would have to leave the Chinese province of Manchuria and give the warm water port of Port Arthur and parts of Sakhalin Island to the Japanese. France has been humiliated within the last 50 years by the Germans and continues to hold a strong grudge against them. The French lost a war that they had thought they would win without a problem in the Franco-Prussian War, and are looking for revenge and want to reclaim the mantle as the strongest land power in Europe from the Germans. Also looking to expand and protect their colonial empire, which they believe the Germans and Italians will challenge. Mostly in Northern Africa for the Italians, and Asia and the Middle Africa for the Germans. Britain is the world's single superpower. The sun quite literally never sets on the empire. Her dominion stretches from Europe to the Americas, to Africa, Asia, and Oceania. Britain is the largest empire ever created at this point and is looking to keep it. Britain also has a colonial commonwealth, being Canada, the British Raj, Australia, and New Zealand. Britain does not like German expansion and challenges its colonialization of Africa and Asia. Mix this with the Germans building a fleet that can challenge the Royal Navy. Britain looks to destroy the Germans' aspirations of leaving Europe and challenging the British world dominance that has reigned over the last century. The Triple Entente formed in 1907 with the members of France, Britain, Russia, all joining in a military alliance to counterbalance the Triple Alliance some years before. All members had their own reasons to join. France joined because of the humiliation against the Germans in the Franco-Prussian War and looked to reclaim its lost territory. Britain joined because of the ever-growing German naval power in the North Atlantic, and Russia joined due to disintegration of good relations with both German nations and the newly built relations with the French some years before. Italy has unified the majority of the Italian people in Europe, but is looking to unify all of the Italian people. They are also looking for allies to help them in making this goal happen, so they are playing both sides of Europe. During the buildup of World War I, the Germans promised that within time Italy would gain back the French-owned Italian peoples, but the French promised that the Italians would gain land with Italian majority in Austria-Hungary. The Italian and the French signed a secret non-aggression pact in 1902 known as the Franco-Italian Agreement. For the French, it was to not have two fronts if a war broke out. And for the Italians, it was because they already had good relations with the French because of their aid in the Italian Unification War against Austria, who has occupied northern Italy for the last 100 years. Italian imperial ambitions in the Italian-Ethiopian War of 1895 to 1896. Italy gets humiliated by the Ethiopians, who used the mountains in a guerrilla war. The Italians lose and imperial ambition in Africa is halted. Until the Italian-Turkish War in 1911 to 1912. Italy won against the Ottomans, who tried to make the war last as long as possible. But with the British not allowing the Ottomans to let their armies cross Egypt, the Ottomans could not reinforce Libya. Italy gained Libya in North Africa and some islands in East Mediterranean. And the Ottomans were more humiliated and their decline continued. This is often a forgotten war in the history books, but is very important due to the war tactics and technology used. This gives us a look into the war to come, with the first aerial dogfights as well as aerial bombardments, along with other experimental weapons like the machine gun.
I just want to talk to him.
Why do you have a shotgun?
I just want to talk to him.
Dad, this is ridiculous.
I just want to talk to him. I just want to talk to him. I just want to talk to him. I just want to shoot him. I just want to talk to him.
You can't shoot him.
Wait, what? What are you doing?
The Young Turk Revolution in 1908 was a combination of multiple political groups within the Ottoman Empire who sought for new political reforms and attempted to prevent the collapse of the empire, which had been in decline for the last century. They looked to give more religious freedoms, ethnic equality, and increase the Turkish industry, as well as give free education to the masses. They also rewrote the constitution to align with these ideals, as well as to take power from the Sultanate and create a parliamentary system. to fit in the new model of Western civilization. These reforms were put down and the Sultanate grabbed for absolute power. The Young Turks rebelled against the Sultanate. The Sultanate conceded to their demands and was put to little more than a figurehead within government. During the rebellion, the Austrians annexed Bosnia and Bulgaria annexed more regions of Lower Bulgaria. The First Balkans War, from 1912 to 1913, began during the Italian-Turkish War that began a year prior. The Balkans War was a coalition of Balkan states who declared war on the Ottoman Empire. These nations were Serbia, Montenegro, Greece, and Bulgaria, who all looked to unite their people within their own borders and kick the Ottomans out of Europe. The Ottomans lost the war, losing almost all of their European territory in the Balkans to the coalition, as well as the Albanians gaining their independence. However, not everyone was happy with the peace deal and the land annexed in the First Balkans War. The Bulgarians, who felt cheated by the peace deal, declared war on the Serbians and the Greeks in a surprise attack in 1913. Romania and the Ottomans then joined the war, and the Bulgarians were overwhelmed. Bulgaria lost most of its territory gained in the First War and was humiliated by its neighbors. Hey, this is the wrong turn. We're going to need to turn back. A Bosnian Serbian nationalist group named the Black Hand had attempted earlier on June 28th to assassinate Ferdinand by throwing bombs at his car, while he toured a Bosnian city to open a state museum. En route, two of the men chickened out and a third threw his bomb, but it bounced off the back of the moving vehicle and just so happened to blow up a car behind them, and Ferdinand got away. However, later that day, due to miscommunication between Ferdinand and his driver, they were meant to see the injured people from earlier that day. However, the driver still thought they were going to the museum, and on their route took the wrong turn, and then when he was informed of his mistake, he began to reverse. However, one of the assassins in the crowd earlier that day, a man named Gavril Princip, just so happened to be right where the vehicle stopped, and he walked up to the prince and his wife and shot them both dead. This random chance of improbable luck or misfortune, depending on how you look at the situation, was a catalyst to the beginning of World War I, and with the interwebbed alliances created over the last 50 years, caused the war to escalate into a global war. And this is where we will end the video today. Like, comment, and subscribe if you have made it this far, and if you are looking forward to more videos like this. The next video is planned to be on the year 1914, on the true beginning of World War I, and the outcomes that came from all of the alliances and how the world clashes together. And depending on how long that is, it will either be just that year or 1914 and 1915 put together in a single video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, comment if you think I messed something up.